My next guest works internationally as a sales transformation consultant, conference speaker, and seminar leader in the area of sales and negotiation performance. He is the best-selling author of 5 books, has worked in over 30 countries with a client list that includes some of the world's largest and most successful companies. Simon is also the co-founder of the UK's leading sales podcast, The Chat Show. Hang on a moment. I think I need to be refuting this.
On our figures at the moment, Sales Chat Show definitely there, but you know, it could change. It could change in an instant.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to do a bit of a comparison.
There's a competitive sales space.
So please welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast, my mate from the Professional Speaking Association, Simon Hazeldine.
Hello, Janice. Welcome. It's great for me to be with you. So lovely. Thank you for that lovely welcome. And we'll have a battle of sales podcast downloads at some stage, isn't it? All that too much testosterone already. What's going on?
What's going on? Anyway, well, you've been going at it for a lot longer than me, so I
we've been doing it for a few years now.
So, Simon, we've been talking about lockdown. Tell me how you've been working with your clients. What's changed for you? How have they had to adapt?
Yeah, I think it's been obviously a huge change for, I guess pretty much every single company, every single industry. I don't think anybody's been unaffected by this. I've got clients who are working in sectors like pharmaceutical and IT who probably kind of benefited from some of the upside, an increase in demand, of course, but others less so. I think what happened initially sort of March time was I think people were a little uncertain what to do, and it was seen as a temporary kind of measure to get all the sales teams working remotely, working virtually. Now, of course, that's not been a huge difference for some of the, let's say, inside sales folk that I work with, but a bit more for the external sales. But I think what's been the big change is that the buyers have been moved from, often largely working in the office to out of the office. And the McKinsey research that was published, I think late last year, was showing that at that stage, a huge percentage of buyers, huge percentage of customers and companies were saying, we're definitely not going back to the way it was previously. And they were actually quite positive about how the virtual remote kind of supplier interaction was taking place. So we've been working with a lot of clients to help their salespeople to transition to that environment, for their sales managers and sales leaders to how do you manage people. Lots of sales managers, as and sales leaders as I was, used to managing a sort of a remote team, but you would see them face to face some of the time. So you're sort of in a hybrid environment, which is very different to how it's been. It's an selling practice. Good selling practice is good selling practice, but it has to be adapted and altered for the reality of the virtual environment, for the remote environment, the impact on the brain of videos and two-dimensional imagery and missing social cues from body language, etc. So you've got to raise your game, I think, and adapt to the new reality.
I think that's an interesting point, that on the buying side, which is always more advanced, leading the way in terms of change, and it has been for a long time that sellers are having to catch up with the change of buying behavior. But It's then interesting you saying that, and the McKinsey report, that they're not looking to go back. Whereas actually sales leaders have been, well, this is, a year or two and we'll be back to where we were. So it's a really interesting dynamic. There's still a massive lag in thinking that sales are still having to catch up on.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's also, I think it's a reality. I mean, I work with a lot of international clients, so they'll be located in lots of different countries. And, we've been working on a couple of quite significant sales transformation projects with a client, and I have only met two of the stakeholders face to face, and I've only done so once the CSO, once head of sales enablement. I've met them in person once for the last, well, it's going to be a year. It's literally going to be just about a year in March. All of the other stakeholders I have never met in person, but because they're based in the USA, New Zealand, Singapore, so on and so forth, I wasn't likely to anyway. So, I think for more complex high-end B2B, if you're selling into larger organizations, that's probably something that's going on anyway. But it's now very much going to be the way it is. I think it's faster. You can have a faster meeting with a supplier. Maybe that's the attraction to some of the buyers. I can maybe also feel like it's easier for me to get rid of a salesperson if they start to bore the hell out of me on Zoom or Teams than it is maybe if they've made it into the office as well. So, but I think there are efficiency savings for both customers and sellers here, and certainly a lot of my clients say they found it easier to get buyers and stakeholders onto calls. It's easier to get someone on for a 30-minute Zoom call than it probably is to get them in person in the office, or certainly to get three, if you're managing across the decision-making unit, getting multiple stakeholders in one place physically it's always been a challenge just logistically. And so, the virtual environment, I think, offers some upside for us as well.
Yeah, quite a lot of upsides and I think one of them is actually being aware of being more focused, being more focused on the language you use, more focused in the way you present yourself, because you have this little box, so I think it's a way of focusing your mind. Am I being clear? Is my message being clear? Because you kind of got one chance, haven't you?
Yeah.
So all of the skills that you were talking about is being aware of, you've got limited time, they have so many more distractions. Once you get in, you've got to get your point across really quickly. They're not going to be a 2-hour meeting you might have had face to face. That never is going to happen online.
No. I think the only slight caveat, I mean, I 100% agree with everything you said. So, I was introduced when I first started managing virtual teams, which was then largely audio conference, was what somebody told me, the 2 times rule: 2 times more communication, 2 times more clarity, 2 times more checking, 2 times more listening, 2 times more discipline. So you're absolutely right, the focus. Just one thing I would say, found a fascinating piece of research. We were doing a piece on a virtual negotiation conference for about 500 sales leaders for a global IT company. And we found a fascinating piece of research that in virtual negotiations who were tasked with making 5 minutes of sort of small talk conversation, that rapport building, got better commercial results, and both parties were happier with the result than negotiators who just jumped straight into the commercial. So I think not to forget the importance of that rapport, emotional connection piece when we're working virtually. So, and I think that applies to sales managers with their teams, sales leaders as well. So, there's still a human being at either end of the camera. And, let's not forget that all important, how was your weekend? How are the kids? And I think as well, great opportunity. I've seen more people's pet cats, dogs, children coming into meetings. You have a quite a privileged, I think, insight into some of your customers, private lives that you wouldn't have had. And that, I think, that has to be treated, with respect. And also it's quite nice to have, someone's 7-year-old daughter go, waving at you on the, I've built quite some great relationships with some little stakeholders over the last year as well.
And I think this period of time has allowed us to demonstrate more empathy, because you've got a lot more position points. They may be having a meeting and you can see their kitchen in the background as you see their life kind of passes by. So actually the best thing is not to ignore that, as you say, but actually to leverage that more. And especially because we're a bit of an open wound because of COVID, don't ignore the situation that people are in. Really kind of use it as not an opportunity that you would take advantage of, but this allows you to build that build the emotional relationship, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think also just to show respect and understanding. I've had a couple of people, if we were running seminars, they've got in touch with me, they've had the joining instructions, and they said, like, it normally goes, "Dear Simon, really looking forward to being with you, but I'm really sorry, I'm homeschooling at the moment, and I'll do my very best. I'm really hope it doesn't distract," which I always respond back and say, look, if you need to deal with anything, you need to deal with anything. That's just reality. Please don't worry about it. Good for you for even being brave enough to even consider attending some sales training workshop while you've got your children in and you're looking after them. And I think it's just, we just to a certain degree, it's also, we have to redefine professional, and the fact that we just have to acknowledge the reality of certain people's lives, and if they've got that stuff going on, we just have to make allowances for that fact, and just be like you say, empathetic and courteous about it.
So talking about making allowances, what about how much do you think that companies have shifted to make allowances for their customers, to be customer centric?
Oh, I mean, yeah, this is you've asked the wrong question here, because I might now climb onto one of my favorite soapboxes here. I mean, I've done more value prop work and value sales presentation, pitching, whatever you might want to call it, workshops over the years in countless industries, in countless countries, and I still see a huge amount of the time, I still see, anyway, let me tell you all about us, and here's some stuff about us, and here's a bit more stuff. We've won these awards, by the way. Here's a map of the world showing of all of our office locations, and here's the history and all this. And I say, look, that might be really relevant, but if you start with the customer, and you start with the customer's business or organization, their problems, their challenges, focus on the customer, then talk about how you may be able to help them. I mean, if they're a global company, they probably want to know about your global capability. But I mean, I've seen that map of the world slide trotted out for companies that were only selling to a company base, for example, in the UK. And they were talking about, we've expanded into Kuala Lumpur and all this. Why are you telling a UK based company that only operates in the UK about your global capability, right? It's of no benefit. And I think, we've had conversations about this before. I think we talk a good talk, the sales profession, about being customer centric, but typically sales targets in the front of the mind, customers' objectives in the back of the mind. I think it needs to be the other way around. Use customer in the front and tuck your sales objectives in the back. You can't pretend they're not there, let's be honest, but it's the classic, we all know it. The more you help the customer to get what they want, the easier it is for you to get what you want. And that's not asking a few questions and then shoehorning your pre-prepared presentation, at the customer. And I think it's still too, if you looked at that, the CEB, you'll be familiar, the CEB research about, 75% of sales reps said, we're doing a great job of differentiating our company from the competition, but only 3% of customers thought that sales reps were doing a good job of differentiating. So like Houston, we got a problem, right? 3%. And I know why, because they're doing the same old boring presentation all the time. They're talking at the customer about their stuff. That should come later, if indeed it's necessary. And I think that's how you differentiate yourself. Don't talk about yourself, talk about the customer.
I think it's nice when someone says, so tell me about you.
Yes.
They're ready to listen.
Yeah. And of course, now you've got fertile ground, haven't you, on which your message is likely to land. Whereas previously, it's just like, what somebody said to me once, it's the MEGO state, MEGO, and I said, oh, I'm not familiar. I said, oh, it stands for my eyes glaze over. And I think I've never forgotten it. The MEGO state. There's all the buyers going, Oh
Yeah.
God, here we go again,
Yeah, yeah, and I
Another
think
thing, as I
in the
said,
virtual world, they haven't got time for it. There's too many more important things to do. They're not going to tolerate it. You
no.
will never get another meeting with them again. So you have no choice. You've got to do your research. And
Well,
I think salespeople have all, not all, but a lot
no.
of salespeople have kind of relied on what they've done in the past. But I do think that going into 2021, there's a seismic shift.
Oh,
And unless they're able to pick up and move forward in the way that customers want to receive the information, then there's going to be trouble going forward,
yeah.
really.
I mean, I think also the other piece of CEB research, and again, I think it's several years out of date, was and a lot of people know this one, B2B buyers 57% of the way through the buying process. You've heard this one as well. It's probably much further than that. For me, there's a couple of things. One is they've changed the way they're buying, as in they're doing research, which we all do now online before we make a purchasing decision. But the other thing, I suppose even more worrying, they don't even think salespeople will add value. That is my hunches. I've not seen the data to say why they don't involve them. But if you don't think the salesperson is going to be adding any value, they're like a necessary evil rather than a value adder to your buying and decision making process. And I don't think that says a great deal positively about the profession of sales.
No. So there's, still a lot to be done. So what practical strategy would you offer listeners in order to help buyers to buy?
Yeah, I think I suppose a strategy from a seller's point of view, first and foremost, is, I think particularly when revenue is a bit tougher at the moment, is it's going to be much quicker and easier to sell to existing customers who know you and trust you and are comfortable with your value. So, landing with existing and then expanding is a great thing. I think helping customers to buy, the research shows that they want salespeople to help them to navigate alternatives. They want you to advise them and guide them and help them. They are interested to hear that. But I think they are going to be understandably suspicious that whatever you say is going to be nuanced to support your own products and service, which I guess is an understandable concern. But I think you can help customers through a good structured questioning process. What's the nature of their challenges? What is the impact of the challenges? What are the consequences of not taking an action, getting it sorted? What are the results? You can, I think, actually help them to get a much clearer view of what success for them would actually look like, because you as a seller will often be more of an expert in your product or service than they will typically, but also you've probably got a broader view of the marketplace. I mean, for example, I work with a lot of clients in IT. The average CTO, well, if you go a bit further down, definitely IT director, manager, 99% of the time is head down inside their own organization, sorting out all the stuff they need to sort out. They very rarely get the chance to lift their head and, let's say, I don't know, they're IT for a university, find out what the other universities in the UK are doing, or find out what other retailers are doing, which is where you've got such a wealth of valuable experience, case studies, testimonial stories. And I think that's always a powerful, don't tell the customer how great you are. Get another customer, via a case study or a testimonial. Or stories are really, we spend a lot of time now working with salespeople on creating stories, but help the buyer to make a really, really good, the right buying decision, that the solution or the product is absolutely right, will deliver maximum value. Guide them, advise them, educate them. That's what they would really want, I think, from a good salesperson. So when you leave the meeting, they go, wow, we must get Janice back in again. Wow, what a fantastic, I sometimes say to salespeople, we talk about value selling. If you'd finished that initial, what you might think is an early stage sales call, and you said, oh, by the way, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, here's my invoice for the last 90 minutes for the guidance and advice I've given you. If you could just sign that would be fair. And they say, would they pay? So that, I mean, I'm being slightly,
Yeah, but no, that's a good
facetious,
exercise, isn't it?
but
Yeah.
have you delivered value to them? Have you helped them get more clarity, think things through? Maybe you ask them some of the difficult questions, that are uncomfortable for them to consider, but they've got to consider. And then I think to help them is the psychology shows, this is a bit tactical maybe, but 3 options really helps to facilitate decision making. 1 choice is no choice, really. 2 choices gives you a kind of a binary dilemma, but 3 choices seems to facilitate decision making. If you get too many, confused brains don't buy. But if you go 3 choices, give them 3 good choices, and maybe suggest your recommendation, I think would be that would help customers, because I had a head of procurement tell me he suffered sleepless nights sometimes before they signed on the dotted line with some suppliers. Have I chosen the right supplier? Have I got the solution right?
That's a horrendous, I mean, you're not paid enough for that, really, isn't it? And it just means that, the salespeople have not done a good job if you're having sleepless nights as to choose. That is terrible, isn't it?
Yeah, people, I think a lot of sellers think it must be lovely to be a buyer, because I know buyers do a great job of looking all calm and in control and everything. We bring a proper procurement person in for negotiation training, so salespeople can, Jenny's bought, I think one stage, bought more servers than anyone else in the UK, a really experienced procurement person. And they love, picking her brains and finding out what it's like. And then they realize, actually, it's a really busy, demanding, difficult job being a buyer. It is not a walk in the park, and let's help them. Let's help them to make good. I think it was Zig Ziglar, right? The old American yeehaw motivational, think of yourself as an assistant buyer. I know Zig might have said a lot of other stuff that might be a bit wacky and out of date now, but that was quite a cool expression.
And it reminds me of the statistic that actually buyers only have 5% of the time, if they're selected a supplier, to make a decision. 5%. And we're not talking about a small pot of money here. These are massive budgets, but they are only, in the amount of time they have in their day or in their month or in their year, 5% of that time on that supplier.
I've certainly learned from conversations with Jenny, particularly about what actually procurement spend a lot of their time doing. And maybe that 5%, if you're seeing 3 possible suppliers, you're not getting very much of that buyer's time. So to loop back to your point earlier, we've got to be very disciplined, very well planned and prepared, very well researched for those meetings now. Show respect for the buyer's time or the customer's time. Do your research, be planned and prepared, because I think the way you behave in the selling process, they will take as evidence for how you're going to be when they buy from you and they start working with you. So if your meetings are shambolic in the sales process, they're going to think you're going to be pretty shambolic to deal with as a vendor or as a supplier going forward. So, time is even shorter. So you've got to be really disciplined, very, very well prepped.
Oh, well, I think that's a great way. You've just brought it back round again, haven't you? So Simon, how can listeners get hold of you?
My website, simonhazeldine.com. It's spelt SimonHazeldine, spelt Dine, pronounced Dean, family quirk. simonhazeldine.com, at Simon Hazeldine on Twitter. Emails simon@simonhazeldine.com, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I am quite selective about who I connect with. So if they just mentioned your podcast specifically, I'll say, okay, now I know where you've kind of come from. So I'm sure, like lots of your listeners, we all get those awful LinkedIn sort of things that people do, which, by the way, is not social selling. It's just really bad selling done over social media. So if you talk to a real social selling expert like our colleague Sam Rathling in the PSA as a whole, so some people say, oh, don't do that social selling stuff because it's really, and I'm going, no, that's not social selling. That's just hey, Janice, can I connect? Yes, you can. By the way, would you like to buy something?
That's called spam.
That wasn't good selling even before social media was invented.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't get any better on social media, does it?
Yeah, and it ruins your reputation. It's, you know, it's just bad behavior. So yeah. Oh, don't do it. That's what we're warning you. Both of us are warning. Do not do that. Do not connect.
And of course, my final contact, if they go to saleschatshow.com and download lots of episodes, that'll make sure that we stay ahead of Janice's podcast.
I'm going to cut that bit out.
Yeah, in the pod, I shall be edited out as fake news. Yeah. Edit that bit out of the edit that out of the episode. That's about all I deserve as well, I think, for that cheap, shameless plug. So.
Thank you for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast, Simon.
My pleasure. Great to talk to you. And just want to wish everybody listening in, well, firstly, well done for listening into a great podcast. You know, you got to keep getting better, and obviously good luck and good selling. And please make sure you and yours stay safe and well, most important.
Lovely.